Laura Bennett was not born into wealth or privilege. She grew up in a small town in Virginia, where the fields stretched out flat in every direction, and the nearest city was 2 hours away by car. Her father was a mechanic. Her mother, Captain Ann Bennett, was one of the first officers to serve on Earth's early deep space patrol ships, back when humanity was just beginning to push past its own solar system. Laura remembered sitting on the porch as a little girl, looking up at the stars, and knowing that her mother was somewhere out there, flying through the dark. She remembered the long months of waiting, and the short, precious weeks when her mother came home smelling like engine grease and recycled air. She remembered the stories her mother told her about the things she had seen out in the black, the strange worlds, the alien signals, the beauty and the danger of a universe that did not care whether you lived or died. Her mother died when Laura was 14. A hull breach on a patrol ship near the edge of the solar system. They told Laura it was quick. She never believed them. Laura enlisted in the Earth Defense Force on her 18th birthday. She did not enlist because she wanted revenge, or because she had something to prove. She enlisted because her mother had shown her that the universe was vast and dark and full of things that could hurt you. And Laura decided she would rather face those things than hide from them. She was not the fastest or the strongest in her training class, but she was the most stubborn. When other recruits quit after the brutal zero-gravity combat drills, Laura kept going. When the instructors pushed her until her body broke, she healed and came back. She finished her training near the top of her class and was assigned to a patrol ship, just like her mother. Over the next 25 years, Laura built a career that most officers could only dream of. She fought in the Proxima Rebellion when a group of outer colonies tried to break away from Earth in a violent uprising. She led the defense of Callisto Station when pirate fleets attacked the Jupiter trade routes. She personally commanded ground forces during the siege of Kepler-7, a brutal 3-month battle on a frozen world where her unit was outnumbered 5-1 and cut off from resupply. She held that position with fewer than 800 soldiers against an enemy force of 4,000, and she did not lose a single inch of ground. She earned every scar on her body. The one on her jaw came from Kepler-7. There was a piece of shrapnel still sitting near her left collarbone that the doctor said was too dangerous to remove. She had burns on her forearms from pulling a wounded soldier out of a burning vehicle on Proxima. She never talked about any of it unless someone asked, and even then she kept it short. Her soldiers did not follow her because she gave great speeches. They followed her because she never once asked them to do something she was not willing to do herself. She carried her own gear. She ate the same food they ate. She slept on the same hard ground. And when the fighting started, she was always at the front. That was the woman who was now assembling a fleet to answer a king who thought humans were afraid. The Ironclad was the first ship to report ready. Captain Derek Hale had his crew prepared in under 4 hours. The Ironclad was a heavy cruiser with thick armor and oversized guns, and Derek ran it like a tight fist. He was a tall man with a shaved head and a quiet way of speaking that made people listen carefully. He had served under Laura at Callisto Station, and when she called him, he did not ask questions. He simply said he would be ready. Lieutenant Megan Cole set up her tactical station aboard the Ironclad and went to work immediately. Megan was 29 years old, small, with sharp eyes behind thin glasses, and she had a mind that could hold an entire battlefield inside it at once. She pulled every piece of intelligence Earth had on the Valkyrie military and began running simulations. Fleet positions, weapons capabilities, shield frequencies, patrol routes, response times. She fed it all into her models and started looking for weaknesses. She found them. The Valkyrie were powerful, but they were also predictable. They had fought the same way for thousands of years because no one had ever forced them to change. They used rigid formations, overwhelming numbers, and brute force. They did not adapt well to surprise, and they had almost no experience fighting an enemy that moved fast and hit from multiple directions at once. Megan brought her findings to Laura in the briefing room of the command ship Dauntless. She laid out her analysis and said that the Valkyrie could be beaten, but it would require speed, precision, and a willingness to take risks that most commanders would not consider. Laura studied the data for a long time, asked 3 questions, and then told Megan to build the battle plan around those weaknesses. Commander Chris Dunn prepared his ground forces on the lunar training base. Chris was a broad-shouldered man in his late 30s, with a thick beard and a reputation for being the most aggressive ground commander in the fleet. His Marines called him the Wolf of Titan because of a battle he had fought on Saturn's moon, where he had led a charge through an enemy position with nothing but a sidearm and a combat knife. He drilled his soldiers in zero-gravity combat, close-quarters fighting, and shipboarding tactics. No other species in the galaxy still practiced boarding warfare. It was considered primitive, a relic of ancient times when ships were small enough to fight inside. Modern warships were enormous, and most species fought their battles entirely with guns and missiles from a distance. But humans had never stopped training for the close fight, because humans understood something that most aliens did not. There was a psychological power in looking your enemy in the eye, in putting boots on their deck, and taking their ship with your hands. It was terrifying in a way that no missile could ever be. The fleet assembled in orbit around Earth. 47 warships, ranging from heavy cruisers like the Ironclad to fast destroyers and support frigates. It was not the largest fleet in the galaxy, but every ship was crewed by people who had volunteered for this mission, knowing exactly what they were flying into. Laura stood on the bridge of the Dauntless and addressed the entire fleet over open channels. She did not give a dramatic speech. She did not pound her fist or raise her voice. She simply told them the truth. She said that a king on the far side of the galaxy had told every species in existence that humans were afraid. She said they were going to show him what humans looked like when they were not afraid and when they were angry. She told them to fight smart, to fight hard, and to come home alive. She said she would bring as many of them home as she could, and she meant it. The fleet jumped to faster-than-light speed and disappeared from Earth's sky. During the journey, Laura barely slept. She sat in the command center, reviewing intelligence reports, studying star maps, and refining the battle plan with Megan. At one point, Megan came in with a cup of coffee and told Laura that she needed to rest or she would not be sharp when they arrived. Laura took the coffee, drank it, and said she would rest when King Zorath learned her name. Megan did not argue. She had served with Laura long enough to know that when the general said something in that tone, the conversation was over. Somewhere ahead of them, across the vast emptiness of space, the Valkyrie border fleet waited in the system of Drathis. Over 100 warships, armed and confident, guarding the gateway to the Dominion. Their commander, High Warlord Velnara, had received word that a small human fleet was approaching, and had laughed when he heard the numbers. 47 ships against his 100. He told his officers it would be over before it started. He was right about that, but not in the way he expected. The Drathis system was a cold and ugly place. It had no habitable worlds, just 5 dead rocks spinning around a dim red star. But it was the gateway into Valkyrie space, and because of that, the Dominion had turned it into a fortress. Weapons platforms floated in orbit around every planet. Sensor arrays swept every inch of space for light years in every direction. And sitting in the middle of it all, arranged in a massive wall of steel and firepower, was the Valkyrie border fleet. 112 warships. Each one was enormous, built like a floating mountain, covered in armor plating 3 feet thick, and bristling with plasma cannons that could crack a moon in half. The Valkyrie built their ships to intimidate as much as to fight. They were dark, angular, and designed to make anyone who saw them feel small. High Warlord Velnara commanded the fleet from his flagship, the Burning Crown. He was tall even by Velkari standards, with deep scars running across his stone-like face from decades of combat. He had fought in 14 wars and never lost. When he received the report that a human fleet of 47 ships had dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system, he did not even bother to stand up from his command chair. He opened a communication channel and ordered the humans to turn around and go home. He told them they were outnumbered, outgunned, and unwelcome. He gave them one chance to leave. General Laura Bennett stood on the bridge of the Dauntless and listened to the transmission. Around her, the bridge crew was tense and silent. Every screen showed the Velkari fleet spread out ahead of them like a wall of iron. The numbers were not good. Everyone knew that. Laura opened a channel and responded. She told Velnara to move his ships, or she would move them for him. There was a pause on the other end. Then Velnara laughed and cut the channel. He gave the order to his fleet to advance and destroy the human ships. Laura had expected this. She had planned for it. She turned to Lieutenant Megan Cole and said one word. Now. Megan's fingers flew across her console. In the hours before they arrived, she and Laura had designed a battle plan built entirely around the weaknesses Megan had found in the Velkari military doctrine. The Velkari fought in rigid, heavy formations. They moved together like a single massive block, relying on their size and firepower to overwhelm the enemy. They expected their opponents to do the same, to form a line and trade shots until one side broke. Laura had no intention of doing that. On her command, the Earth fleet split apart. 47 ships divided into 5 separate attack groups, each one racing in a different direction at full speed. The Velkari sensors struggled to track them all. Velnara frowned and ordered his fleet to hold formation, but the human groups were already circling around his flanks, coming at him from 5 directions at once. Captain Derek Hale led the center group with the ironclad at the tip. His job was the most dangerous. He flew straight at the heart of the Velkari line, drawing their fire and their attention. The ironclad shook as plasma bolts slammed into its heavy armor. Explosions lit up the space around it. Derek gripped the arms of his chair and told his crew to hold course. They needed to keep the Velkari focused on them while the other groups got into position. It worked. While the Velkari concentrated their fire on Derek's group, the 4 flanking groups hit them from the sides and behind. Earth's destroyers were faster and more agile than the massive Velkari warships. They darted between the enemy formations, firing precise shots at engines and weapon systems before the Velkari could bring their big guns around to aim. Megan Cole sat in the tactical center of the ironclad, coordinating the entire battle. She tracked every ship on both sides, calling out targets and movements in a rapid, steady voice. She saw patterns in the Velkari response before the Velkari commanders even knew they were making them. When a gap opened in the enemy formation, she sent ships through it. When the Velkari tried to regroup, she hit them from a new angle before they could settle. The Velkari were confused. They had never fought an enemy like this. Every species they had ever faced had lined up and fought them head-on, and the Velkari had always won because they were bigger and stronger. But the humans were not trying to be bigger or stronger. They were being faster and smarter, and it was working. 3 hours into the battle, Commander Chris Dunn launched the boarding action. His Marines loaded into armored boarding pods, small, fast, heavily shielded capsules designed to punch through a ship's hull and deliver soldiers directly inside. The pods fired from the Earth frigates and streaked across the battlefield toward 3 Velkari capital ships that had been disabled by the flanking attacks. The pods hit the Velkari hulls with a sound like thunder. Cutting charges burned through the armor, and Chris Dunn was the first one through the breach. He dropped into the corridor of a Velkari warship with his rifle up and his marines right behind him. The Valkyrie crew was shocked. No species boarded ships anymore. It was an ancient, barbaric tactic that the galaxy had abandoned thousands of years ago. But the humans had never abandoned it, because they understood something fundamental about war. Technology could be matched. Ships could be built. Weapons could be copied. But the willingness to look your enemy in the face and fight them with your hands, that could not be manufactured. Chris and his Marines fought through the corridors of the Valkyrie ship in brutal close-quarters combat. The Valkyrie soldiers were bigger and stronger individually, but they were not trained for this kind of fighting. They were used to operating weapon systems from behind consoles, not defending their own hallways from enemies who moved fast, used cover, and worked together like a single organism. One by one, the 3 boarded ships fell to the human Marines. Chris took the bridge of his target ship and sent a message to Laura. 3 enemy capital ships captured. His voice was breathing hard, and there was blood on his face, but he was grinning. The battle lasted 11 hours in total. By the end, 31 Valkyrie warships were destroyed. The rest of the border fleet broke formation and retreated deeper into Valkyrie space. The weapons platforms and sensor arrays in the Drathis system were demolished. Earth lost 8 ships. Laura stood on the bridge of the Dauntless and read the casualty reports herself. Every name, every ship. She said nothing, but the crew could see the weight of it on her face. Victory did not erase loss. Laura had never believed it did. Velnara escaped aboard the Burning Crown, which had taken heavy damage but managed to jump to faster-than-light speed before Derek could finish it off. He sent a frantic report directly to King Zorath on the Dominion capital world. Zorath was in his throne room when the report arrived. He read it slowly. His golden eyes moved across the details of the battle. The ships lost, the formations broken, the boarding actions. He asked Velnara who commanded the human fleet. Velnara told him it was a woman, a general named Laura Bennett. Zorath was quiet for a moment. Then he waved his hand dismissively and said that one lucky battle meant nothing. He ordered the full central fleet of the Valkyrie Dominion to mobilize. 300 warships. The greatest armada the Dominion had assembled in centuries. He said he would deal with this human woman himself. Meanwhile, the recording of the Battle of Drathis reached the Galactic Assembly on Aethon Prime. The representatives gathered in the Great Chamber and watched the footage in silence. They watched the tiny human fleet tear apart a force more than twice its size. They watched the boarding pods slam into the Valkyrie hulls. They watched human Marines fight hand-to-hand inside enemy ships. Counselor Idris Fain, the neutral mediator, sat in his chair and watched with a small, knowing smile on his face. Ambassador Katie Sherman stood at her podium with her arms folded. A representative from a nearby delegation leaned over and asked her if she had known this was going to happen. Katie looked at them and said that she had asked nicely first. Then she turned back to the screen and said nothing more. The galaxy was watching now, and what it saw was something it had never expected from the quiet little species from the small blue world. King Zorath Vel Khan stood on the command deck of his flagship, the Throne of Stars, and watched his armada take shape around him. 300 warships, the largest fleet the Valkyrie Dominion had assembled in over 200 years. Dreadnoughts, the size of small cities. Cruisers carrying enough firepower to burn continents. Fighter carriers loaded with thousands of attack craft ready to swarm across any battlefield. This was not just a military response. This was a statement. Zorath intended to crush the human fleet so completely that no species in the galaxy would ever question Valkyrie power again. He had already written the speech he would give at the Galactic Assembly after the battle. describing how the foolish humans had dared to challenge the Dominion, and how they had been ground into dust for it. He gave the order. The Armada moved out of Velkari space and headed for the Drathis region. Laura Bennett knew he was coming. She had been counting on it. The Battle of Drathis had not been an end in itself. It was bait. Laura had studied Zorath's history carefully. She knew he was proud. She knew that a defeat at his border, especially at the hands of a species he had publicly mocked, would be something he could not ignore. She knew he would come personally, with everything he had, because his ego would demand it. And she knew that when he did, he would be pulling the strongest ships away from their defensive positions and bringing them out into open space where Earth's speed and tactics would give them the greatest advantage. She had planned for this from the very beginning. While the Velkari Armada moved toward Drathis, Laura sent a coded transmission back to Earth. Admiral Greg Lawson received it in the war room and immediately put the second phase into motion. Under emergency authorization, Greg assembled a reserve fleet of 30 warships that had been quietly preparing in deep space docks for the past 2 weeks. These ships moved in silence, running without active sensors, and slipped into position behind the gas giant in the Velkari system of Norath, one jump away from the expected battlefield. Laura positioned her fleet in the open space between Drathis and Norath. She did not hide. She did not retreat. She sat right where Zorath can find her, and waited. The Velkari Armada arrived like a thunderstorm. 300 warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel and spread across the space ahead of the human fleet, in a formation that stretched for thousands of miles. The throne of stars sat at the center, surrounded by a ring of dreadnoughts, glowing with power. Zorath opened a communication channel. His image appeared on the screens of every ship in both fleets. He looked at Laura and told her she had fought well at Drathis, better than he had expected from a human. But he said it was over now. He told her that the Velkari had conquered species far older and far stronger than humanity, and that she was simply delaying something that could not be stopped. He offered her one chance to surrender, and said he might let her people live if she did. Laura stood on the bridge of the Dauntless. She looked at his face on the screen and opened her own channel so that both fleets and the relay satellites that were broadcasting to the Galactic Assembly could hear her. She told him he had made a mistake when he called humanity afraid. She said that humans do not fear war. They hate it. They hate it because they know exactly what it costs, because they have been fighting each other and everything else since the first day they stood upright on a small blue world at the edge of the galaxy. She told him that every single person in her fleet knew what it meant to lose someone, and that was not fear. That was fury. She told him he was about to learn the difference. Then she cut the channel and gave the order to attack. The battle that followed was the largest space engagement the galaxy had seen in a generation. Laura threw her fleet forward in the same style that had worked at Drathis, splitting into fast-moving groups that hit the Velkari formation from multiple angles. But this time the numbers were far worse. 300 against 39 remaining Earth warships. Even with superior tactics, the math was brutal. The first hour was devastating. Earth ships traded blows with the Velkari dreadnoughts and took terrible punishment. 2 destroyers were torn apart in the first exchange of fire. A frigate lost its engines and drifted out of the fight. The Dauntless itself took a direct hit to its port side that killed 11 crew members and knocked out 3 weapons batteries. Laura did not flinch. She stood on her bridge with smoke in the air and alarms screaming around her and continued to give orders. She moved her ships like chess pieces, pulling damaged vessels back, pushing fresh ones forward, always keeping the Velkari off balance, never letting them settle into the kind of straight slugging match where their numbers would win. Derek Hale and the Ironclad fought like a battering ram at the center of the battle. The big cruiser absorbed hit after hit and kept firing. Derek's crew worked with calm efficiency even as the ship shook and groaned around them. When a plasma bolt breached the lower deck, Derek sent repair crews and kept fighting without pausing. Megan Cole was the invisible force behind every move. She sat in the tactical center surrounded by screens, tracking hundreds of ships at once, calling out openings and threats in a voice that never wavered. She saw the flow of the battle, the way a musician hears a song, every piece connected, every movement part of a larger pattern. She guided the Earth fleet through gaps in the Valkyrie formation that the enemy did not even know existed, until human ships were already through them and firing at their unprotected flanks. But the Valkyrie had numbers, and numbers mattered. Slowly Zorath's fleet began to close around the Earth ships like a fist. Velnara, commanding the left wing from his repaired burning crown, pushed forward aggressively, trying to cut off Laura's escape route. Zorath himself directed the center, driving his dreadnoughts straight at the Dauntless. For a moment, it looked like the trap was closing on the humans instead. Laura watched the tactical display and saw the ring forming around her. She looked at the clock on her console. She had been waiting for this exact moment. She sent a single coded signal. Behind the gas giant of Norath, Admiral Greg Lawson received the signal. He stood on the bridge of his command ship and gave the order. 30 Earth warships powered up their engines and jumped. They emerged from faster-than-light travel directly behind the Valkyrie armada. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The Valkyrie rear guard had no warning. Greg's ships hit them at full speed, tearing through the back of the formation with concentrated fire. Explosions rippled across the Valkyrie fleet, as ships that had been facing forward suddenly found themselves under attack from behind. The Valkyrie formation, already stretched by Laura's flanking attacks, collapsed. Ships broke away in different directions, trying to respond to the new threat. Command and coordination fell apart. Velnara tried to swing his wing around, but Megan had already anticipated it and sent Derek Hale straight at him. The ironclad slammed into the Burning Crown's formation and scattered it. Laura pushed forward with everything she had. The Dauntless led the charge straight at the Throne of Stars. Every gun on the ship fired at Zorath's flagship. The Throne of Stars was enormous and heavily shielded, but it was designed to be a symbol of power, not a frontline warship. Its shields buckled under the concentrated fire of a dozen Earthships. Derek Hale brought the ironclad alongside and added his guns to the barrage. The Throne's shields collapsed. Chris Dunn did not need to be told what to do. His boarding pods launched from 3 different ships and slammed into the hull of the Throne of Stars. Chris went in first, as he always did. His Marines poured through the breaches and fought their way through the corridors of the King's flagship. The Valkyrie Royal Guards were the best soldiers the Dominion had. They fought hard, and they fought well. Chris took a blade across his left arm that cut deep enough to hit bone. He wrapped it with a field bandage and kept moving. His Marines pushed forward room by room, deck by deck, fighting for every inch. It took 2 hours to reach the command deck. When Chris kicked open the doors, he found King Zorath standing in the center of the room, surrounded by the bodies of his personal guards. The king's armor was cracked and scorched. He held a weapon in his hand, but he did not raise it. Chris leveled his rifle at the king and told him it was over. Outside, the Valkyrie armada was finished, over 200 ships destroyed or disabled. The space between Drathis and Norath was filled with wreckage and silence. Laura received the report from Chris. The king was captured. She closed her eyes for just a moment. Then she opened them and gave the order to begin rescue operations for survivors on both sides. She told her crew to bring the king to the Dauntless. They brought King Zorath to the bridge of the Dauntless in restraints. 2 of Chris Dunn's Marines walked on either side of him, their rifles held ready, though the king showed no sign of resistance. His white armor, once covered in the symbols of every world the Valkyrie had conquered, was cracked and blackened with scorch marks. One of the gold lights in his eyes had dimmed, damaged in the fighting. He walked slowly, and for the first time in his very long life, he did not walk like a king. The bridge of the Dauntless was not in good shape either. There were scorch marks on the walls. 2 of the overhead lights were broken, leaving parts of the room in shadow. A panel near the navigation station had been blown open during the battle, and someone had covered it with a temporary seal. The crew was tired. Their uniforms were dirty. Some of them had bandages on their hands and faces from the fighting. But every one of them stood at their station, and every one of them watched as the king was brought before their general. Laura Bennett stood near the forward viewport. Behind her, the stars stretched out in every direction, and the wreckage of the battle drifted slowly through the dark. She had not changed her uniform since the fighting started. There was blood on her sleeve from where she had helped carry a wounded crew member to the medical bay during the battle. Her hair had come loose from its tie on one side. Her face was pale from exhaustion. She was not tall. She was not physically imposing. Standing next to Zorath, who towered over her even without his throne, she looked like she could have been anyone. A teacher, a doctor, someone you might pass on the street and never look at twice. But when she turned to face the king, her eyes were steady and clear, and there was something in them that made the entire bridge go silent. He studied her face for a long time, as if he was trying to understand something he had never encountered before. Then he spoke. He asked her if she intended to kill him. He said that was what a conqueror would do. He said that was what the Velkhari would do if they were standing where she was standing now. Laura shook her head. She told him that humans are not conquerors. She said they did not come to his space to take his empire or to destroy his people. She told him they came because he took something that did not belong to him, and because he stood in front of the entire galaxy and mistook human restraint for weakness. She took a step closer to him. The Marines shifted, but she waved them still. She told Zorath that the reason humans talk about peace is not because they fear war. It is because they have seen what they are capable of when peace fails, and that knowledge terrifies them more than any alien king ever could. She said that humans hold themselves back, not because they are cowards, but because they choose mercy. And he should be grateful that mercy was still what she was offering today. Zorath said nothing. His remaining golden eye watched her without blinking. Laura told him what was going to happen next. He would return New Haven to Earth. He would withdraw every Velkhari soldier and ship from all occupied human territories. He would sign a treaty recognizing Earth's sovereignty and borders. And he would stand before the Galactic Assembly and tell every species in the galaxy exactly what happened when he called humans afraid. Zorath asked what would happen if he refused. Laura did not answer immediately. She looked at him for a moment, and then she simply gestured toward the viewport. Outside, the remains of his grand armada floated in the dark. Broken ships, silent engines. The throne of stars, his symbol of power for centuries, was a captured wreck being towed by an Earth frigate. She told him she did not think he wanted to find out. For a long moment, the king was silent. The bridge crew waited. The Marines waited. Even the hum of the ship's systems seemed to grow quieter. Then King Zorath Velkhan lowered his head. It was a small movement, just a few inches, but it carried the weight of 9,000 years of Velkhari pride. He said he agreed to her terms. Laura nodded. She told the Marines to take the king to a secure room and treat his injuries. She told them to treat him with respect. He was a prisoner, not a trophy. 3 weeks later, the Galactic Assembly gathered on Athen Prime for a session that every species in the galaxy wanted to witness. Representatives filled every seat, and thousands more watched on screens from their homeworlds. King Zorath stood at the center of the chamber. He wore simple clothing, not his armor. His restraints had been removed. Laura had insisted on that. She told Greg Lawson that if Zorath was going to address the assembly, he would do it as a free person making a choice, not as a prisoner being paraded. Zorath spoke. He did not make excuses. He did not try to twist the story or save his pride. He told the assembly what had happened. He said that he had called humans afraid, and that a human general had answered him with a force and a fury that his empire had not faced in thousands of years. He said that his fleet was destroyed, his flagship was captured, and he was brought before a woman who could have killed him and taken his empire, and instead she offered him mercy and a fair peace. He told the assembly that he had been wrong about humans. He said they were not afraid. He said they were something far more dangerous than that. They were patient. When he finished, he stepped away from the podium and returned to his seat. The chamber was completely silent. Then Laura Bennett walked to the podium. She wore her uniform, clean and pressed, with her rank on her collar and nothing else. She looked out across the vast chamber at the hundreds of faces watching her. Alien eyes of every shape and color, representatives of civilizations that were old when humanity was still learning to farm. She spoke in a calm, clear voice. She said that humanity did not want an empire. Humans did not want to rule the galaxy or dominate other species. They wanted to explore, to learn, to build, and to live alongside every other civilization that was willing to live in peace. But she said this clearly and without any hesitation. If any species, any kingdom, any empire ever again mistook that desire for weakness, if anyone took what belonged to Earth and expected humans to accept it quietly, they would learn the same lesson the Valkyrie had learned. And the next time, she said, the response might not come with an offer of mercy at the end. She paused and let her words settle across the chamber like a stone dropping into still water. She said that humans do not fear war. They simply prefer not to wage it. She told the assembly not to make them prefer otherwise. She stepped back from the podium. The silence held. It stretched across the enormous chamber like a living thing, heavy and full of meaning. Then, slowly, one by one, the representatives began to rise from their seats. Not in applause, not in celebration, in acknowledgement, in recognition that something had shifted in the balance of the galaxy, and that the quiet species from the small blue world was not so quiet anymore. Katie Sherman was waiting for Laura outside the chamber doors. She looked at her old friend and asked how she felt. Laura looked through the viewport at the stars. Somewhere out there, New Haven was being returned to its people. Somewhere out there, families were going home. She said she felt tired. She said she wanted to go home too. They walked together down the long corridor toward the shuttle bay. Derek Hale was leaning against the wall near the airlock, his arms crossed, his expression calm. He gave Laura a quiet nod when he saw her. Megan Cole was sitting on a bench nearby, her glasses pushed up on her forehead, looking like she had finally slept for the first time in weeks. She stood up and held out a cup of coffee. Chris Dunn was already inside the shuttle. His left arm was in a sling, and he had a fresh bandage across his knuckles, but he grinned when Laura climbed aboard. He told her that was a good speech. Laura told him she meant every word. She sat down in her seat and looked at the people around her. Derek, steady and unshakable. Megan, brilliant and tireless. Chris, fierce and loyal. Katie, who had started all of this by standing at a podium and asking politely for justice. Laura allowed herself a small smile. It was the first one in weeks. The shuttle lifted off from Aethon Prime and turned toward the stars. Behind them, the Galactic Assembly was still buzzing with the echoes of what had happened. Species that had ignored humanity for centuries were now speaking the name Laura Bennett. Empires that had dismissed Earth as insignificant were now redrawing their maps and reconsidering their plans. It had learned that the most dangerous species in the universe was not the one that boasted about its power or threatened its neighbors. It was the one that sat quietly, asked nicely, and never started a fight. But God help anyone who started one with them. The shuttle disappeared into the black, carrying its passengers home. And across 900 star systems, a king sat alone in a room and thought about the woman who had beaten him. The woman who could have taken everything and who had chosen instead to give him a chance he did not deserve. He did not understand her. He was not sure he ever would. But he would never underestimate her kind again. The Galactic Assembly was the largest gathering of species in the known universe. It met once every cycle on a neutral station called Aethon Prime, a massive ring of metal and glass floating in the empty space between three dead stars. Over 300 species sent their representatives here. Some came in robes of silk. Some came in armor. Some floated in tanks of liquid because they could not breathe open air. But they all came, because the assembly was where the galaxy decided who owned what, and who owed what to whom. Ambassador Katie Sherman stood behind the tall silver podium at the center of the chamber. She was a woman in her early 50s, with short gray hair and a calm face that had learned how to hide anger a long time ago. She wore the dark blue uniform of the United Earth Diplomatic Corps, and she spoke clearly into the translation device that carried her words to every corner of the room in 300 different languages. She was asking for something very simple. She wanted the return of New Haven. New Haven was a human colony world on the edge of Earth's territory. It had 40,000 people living on it. Farmers, engineers, teachers, children. 6 months ago, the Valkyrie Dominion had sent warships to New Haven, landed troops on the surface, and told every human living there to leave. No warning, no negotiation, no reason given, except that the Valkyrie wanted the planet, and so they took it. Katie explained all of this to the assembly. She showed images of the evacuation, families carrying bags onto transport ships, children crying, old people who had built homes on that world with their own hands, being told they had 24 hours to leave everything behind. She spoke about the 300 people who had been killed when they refused to go, shot down by Valkyrie soldiers in the streets of their own towns. She did not raise her voice. She did not beg. She simply laid out the facts and asked the assembly to recognize that what the Valkyrie had done was wrong, and to order the return of the colony. When she finished, the chamber was quiet for a moment. Then a sound filled the room. It was laughter. King Zorath Velkan sat on the far side of the chamber, on a throne that floated 3 feet above the floor. He was enormous, nearly 8 feet tall, with skin like dark stone and eyes that glowed a faint gold. His armor was white and covered in symbols that represented every world his empire had conquered. Behind him stood 6 of his warlords, each one armed, and watching the room with cold expressions. Zorath stopped laughing and stood up from his throne. His voice filled the room on its own. He said that he had listened to the human ambassador with great patience. He said that her words were very pretty and very sad. Then he looked directly at Katie and told the entire assembly that humans talk about peace because they are afraid of war. He walked slowly across the open floor of the chamber as he spoke. He said that the Valkyrie had ruled their part of the galaxy for 9,000 years. They had conquered species that were ancient before humans had even learned to make fire. He said that when the Valkyrie wanted something, they took it, and the galaxy respected them for it because strength was the only language the universe truly understood. He stopped in the center of the floor and turned to face the full assembly. He said that humans were a young species, barely a few hundred years old in space, and that they hid behind words like diplomacy and peace because they didn't have the spine to fight. He called them a timid species. He said they were soft, fragile creatures from a small blue world, who were too scared to do anything except talk. Some of the representatives in the chamber shifted uncomfortably. A few looked away, but others nodded. The galaxy had never taken humanity very seriously. Humans were new. Humans were small. Humans had not conquered anyone, and in a galaxy that respected power above all else, that made them easy to dismiss. Katie stood at her podium and did not move. Her face showed nothing. But beneath the podium, where no one could see, her hands were shaking. Not from fear, from something much worse. She activated a small device on her wrist and sent the full recording of the session back to Earth at faster-than-light speed. 12 hours later, the recording played on a screen in the war room of United Earth Command, deep beneath the mountains of Colorado. Admiral Greg Lawson sat at the head of the long table with his arms crossed, watching the screen in silence. Around him sat the senior officers of Earth's military command. General Laura Bennett sat at the far end of the table. She was a woman of 46, with dark brown hair pulled back tight, and a face that did not waste expressions on things that did not matter. She had a thin scar along her jaw, from a piece of shrapnel she had taken years ago on a world most people had never heard of. She wore her uniform without any unnecessary decoration, just her rank, her name, and the service ribbons she had earned the hard way. She watched the recording without moving. She watched Zorath laugh. She watched him call her species afraid. She watched Katie Sherman hold herself together with the kind of strength that most people would never understand. When the recording ended, the room was silent. Greg looked down the table at Laura and waited. Laura did not speak right away. She sat with her hands folded on the table, her eyes still on the screen where the image of Zorath's smiling face was frozen. Everyone in the room knew who she was. Everyone in the room knew what she had done in her career, the battles she had fought, the impossible situations she had walked into and walked out of when no one thought she could. Finally, she stood up. She looked at Greg and said in a quiet voice that she would like to respond to the king. She said she wanted to deliver the message personally. Greg studied her for a long moment. He had known Laura for 20 years. He had seen that look in her eyes exactly twice before, and both times the people on the other end of it had deeply regretted their choices. He nodded and told her she had full authorization. Laura turned and walked out of the war room. Her boots echoed down the long hallway. She pulled out her communicator and made 3 calls. The first was to Captain Derek Hale. The second was to Commander Chris Dunn. The third was to Lieutenant Megan Cole. She told each of them the same thing. She said to get ready, that they were going to war, and that she intended to make sure the galaxy remembered why it should never have called humanity afraid. Within 6 hours, the United Earth Defense Fleet began to mobilize. 47 warships powered up their engines and started loading weapons and supplies. Soldiers said goodbye to their families. Pilots ran final checks on their fighters. Engineers sealed hull plates and tested shield generators. And somewhere on the far side of the galaxy, King Zorath Valkan sat on his throne and smiled, completely unaware that the woman coming for him was the last person in the universe he should have provoked.